Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. We all know today's guest because he was the governor of this state for 3 terms. And we listen to him because he might be the most thoughtful and eloquent political person in the country. I'm pleased that he comes on this program, and I know you are too. This is the first part of a 2-part program. Welcome, Mario Cuomo.
Nice to be back.
It's lovely to have you. I was thinking, Rosa Parks died the other day, and with her simple act of saying, I'm tired and I'm going to sit, she really changed the country, right?
I think she had a lot to do with it. I think probably Rosa Parks and other people in that period.
Well, she was
things.
Lucky to have these great allies.
Well, I think she was a kind of spark that created a bonfire. Yeah. But to have the bonfire, you have to have twigs that are dry. You have to be in a circumstance, in a situation where people are ready to be ignited. And I think there was something about that time, that came after the war, and the 50s, which were kind of easygoing, and the 60s, in which people started getting energized about Vietnam and a lot of other things. And it created an attitude that was exactly right for civil rights and Johnson and that whole period. But circumstance means everything. Rosa Parks, 20 years earlier, wouldn't have meant a darn thing.
Well, but today, circumstances are there
yes.
for a voice to come clear and strong to the American people.
That's you referred to me as thoughtful. Maybe it's because I have such difficulty finding answers to some of the big questions that you
But at least
you
think
thinking.
about them. You think about them a lot. You get the feeling a lot of people don't think about them.
Well, yeah, but you say, for example, now that the people are ready for it now. I'm not at all sure where the people of the United States are. I know that we're described as red and blue. I know everybody says we're polarized. And I've said this to you before and to audiences before, and I say it to myself all the time. If you would ask me, what is it that the American scene lacks most, that's most important, I'd say a philosophy that's identifiable, communicable, and understandable. I mean, if you ask, what is this place called America? I mean, what are the American people? What do they stand for? Well, you have a number of choices. They stand for rugged individualism, like our first century. Yeah, we talk about that a lot. We're still largely John Wayne, I guess, or we like to think we are. So that makes us individuals. How about the people who believe in sharing? They're community-oriented people. They're family-oriented people. They understand the interconnectedness and interdependence of all of us, and they work at that. I wish they said that about us. I wish we said that about ourselves. I'm not sure we can.
But when we have tragedies like the tsunami in New Orleans, people really, they couldn't give enough. It struck everybody. But don't you really believe that in addition to a philosophy, you need somebody to articulate it? I mean, we're a country that is affected by charisma, and I think, unfortunately, we don't have enough of it. So,
well, yeah, I think it's certainly helpful to have somebody step forward, define it for you.
Why doesn't anybody do that?
Maybe because they don't believe it. Maybe because they believe you can't win that way. Maybe because they believe if you go forward and you say, hey, look, let's get something clear. You know that instinct that you saw at Katrina, and you see it every time there's a hurricane or a tragedy or a child falls into a well somewhere, and the whole world stops and all the cameras rush to Illinois or wherever it is, and the whole community comes to it to save one child,
right.
Because all of a sudden it's summed up for you. Here's a human life that we can retrieve. Now, that instinct, that's the finest kind of morality. You're talking about religion and morals and the competition of this religious belief. The biggest religious beliefs, the most important ones, are twofold. I'm supposed to love you and get together with you to make this place better. Now, somebody who could articulate that and make it meaningful and point out to you that that was our problem in Europe that led us into Iraq all by ourselves.
Well,
we didn't believe that. We thought we should be alone. That's the problem with the richest people in this country telling us, look, you don't need those government programs like Social Security, etc. That's them saying, take care of me and I'll take care of the rest.
This is the Bush administration that is trying to, to diminish the role of the federal government. but proven wrong.
Well, yeah, they're proven wrong as they have been over and over. The Reagan administration proved it. Our first 100 years proved it. For 100 years, we didn't have any government to speak
But
up.
don't you think part of that is because we don't have the leaders coming up to challenge it the same way you're doing? I mean, I know you go and speak, but you're not speaking, you're not running for office, for instance, or you're not holding office right now. So you're not saying you're going to run for president. So people aren't paying that much attention. The media, Jimmy always says the media is plural for mediocrity. And it is. It's what set this whole thing, I think. It's the way they report and the way we interpret and the way candidates look at polls and look for the consensus rather than leading.
Yeah, I think...
I mean, the fact that people think you can't win if you're going to talk out on issues is sinful, not in a religious sense. I don't want to get into that.
But what sinful? That's a great subject, sin. But
I know.
Well, let's go back to this. No leaders.
Yeah.
Let's start. Let's keep it modern. So let's say Kennedy. Okay, because we were both alive for that, and we both remember Kennedy.
Which Kennedy?
John Kennedy.
Right.
May he rest in peace. What leadership did he show when he won? Zip. Kimoimatsu. That's all they debated about. He and Nixon. It wasn't like, it was charisma.
Right.
And then he won by a hair in Chicago, and they challenged.
But it was his charm and his charisma.
His charm. But
no, I'd rather talk about Robert Kennedy as a leader, because he did move to the
Robert Kennedy
issues.
moved to the issues and did very well here and did very well in other places, and that great tragedy that he was killed so soon, because then nobody picked up his thesis, which is that, look, we have to all come together, take that middle class and marry it to the poor. Here, in 1974, the first political speech I ever made was to the NDC. Yeah. Now, for people who don't have the luxury of knowing New York in the 70s and 60s, you and I remember it, NDC meant November Don't Count. They were the liberals who had this ideology that was so powerful.
It's really called the New Democratic Coalition.
Right. And here's what I said to them. And I got 0 votes. I was there to try to get votes in a race for lieutenant, and I got 0. And here's what I said to them. Look, you are liberal by instinct, so am I. But what's happened is our form of expressing that liberalism has chased the middle class to the right. We're pushing them to the right. We accuse them of this or that when it comes to racism, schools, we say you're no good, you're all apart because you won't let the child. We keep accusing them of things. We run away from them with our expressions of what public morality should be. And what's happening is you're pushing them over to the right. And what's going to happen is the Republicans on the right, the conservatives who believe in the hell with those people who are in trouble, take care of us, we'll take care of them. They're going to make a union with the middle class and beat the poor into oppression. I said, that's inevitable if you continue going the way you're going. We continued going the way we were going, and that's where we are right now.
The New Democratic Coalition, or those liberals, supported McCarthy in that campaign for president. They did. A lot of us who were also liberals, didn't really participate in the New Democrat. It seems, I always have felt, the minute liberals get together and they form an organization, you're lost. It's just totally lost. You can't do it that way.
See.
But and Kennedy was the person who bridged that role. How did that happen?
Well, I think I know how Robert Kennedy made it happen, and I think this is the way you have to say it in order to make it happen. You have to point out not that it is right, morally right. It's not enough to say, hey, look, every religion says you're supposed to love one another. You're supposed to be generous. You're supposed to give. They'll accept that, but they won't make it their policy because it's too one-sided. You've got to address their own needs, the needs of the middle class and the needs of the rich. You have to point out to them, look, not only is it morally right, not only is it the best kind of religion and sweetness and goodness, no matter how you translate that word, it also works for you. Pragmatically, we would be better off if instead of having in this country right now only 1 out of 4 workers who have high skills, we had 70% who were high skilled. You wouldn't then be running all over the world to find high-skilled workers, to bring computer engineers here with visas because you don't have them. And so education, When we invented the public schools, it wasn't because it's good to let those poor kids from South Jamaica and Bed-Stuy get an education. It was because we needed educated people in this country to have certain skills. That's the way you have to make the case. Not only is it right morally, if you want to use the word morally, which I seldom do in politics, not only is the right thing to do with your heart, it is the right thing to do with your head. If we had been better at diplomacy with Europe, we might have made a deal with Hussein. Who said so? Colin Powell said it was possible. The president said it was possible. Cheney said it was possible. But to make a deal with Hussein instead of a war in Iraq, you'd have to have gotten Germany and France on your side. They were on the Iraqi side, or at least that's the way Hussein saw it, Saddam Hussein, and so he wouldn't deal with us. So pragmatically, if you had been smart enough, President Bush, to be a little bit more diplomatic, to get everybody in one place, and we were very close, to get everybody in one place and say, look, let's all go to Saddam Hussein and say, you got no friends, no Germany, no France, no Europe, and you've got to make a deal here or we will squash you like a bug, which they said they could do. See, so that's the key.
But they didn't want to do that.
You have to marry the morality with pragmatism.
Right. But let's go back to this country. We talk about the middle class, the lower middle class, the blue-collar worker. I can't remember the last time we talked about the poor since we had
Absolutely
this
right.
whole thing about the welfare reform. And then the New Orleans hurricane, Katrina, sort of brought to the fore this terrible poverty of people who couldn't get out of there in time, et cetera. And the whole question raged for a couple of weeks maybe, or maybe it was just a week. Poverty or racism, which came first? Were they connected? And it seems to me it's very connected.
Well, it's connected.
And who's talking for the poor these days?
Nobody.
Nobody.
Nobody, not even the Democrats,
No.
except John Edwards.
Yeah.
John Edwards has done a very interesting thing politically. He has converted his entire campaign to poverty. And it's very smart, I think. He can't win that way, but he can distinguish himself from all the other candidates that way. And since the first race you have to make to get to be president is a primary, and you have to go to Democrats, what he's saying to Democrats basically is, look, I'm going to remind you, if you mean anything, you have to be for the poor. And so he's doing that in 10 universities, at lectures, et cetera, talking about poverty, talking about the fact that 4 years in a row poverty has grown, talking about the fact that we have 36 million poor people in the richest country in the world, talking about 11 million children at risk, and the way I describe them is some of them grow up familiar with the sound of gunfire before they've ever heard an orchestra play. That's how bad it is. And so he's doing it. But none of the people, you know, by the time he gets to 2008, he'll have to add Iraq, he'll have to add energy, he'll have to add the fragmentation of and the middle class most of all, which is sliding down. Middle class is getting weaker and weaker because it doesn't make enough money to stay up with the cost of living increase and education, et cetera. So, no, we're not talking about it because it doesn't work politically. And because it doesn't work politically, here, who did we have? We had Carter, who was beset by all kinds of problems, so he didn't have a shot. Then Clinton, who won. Both times he won without 50% of the vote.
And I've never been this great fan of Clinton. I think he was the one who really solidified the central position where you don't really say anything. I mean, that whole Democratic study, what's that called? The more conservative wing of the party? And
Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's give you, here's an interesting thing.
And that set the precedent for the next two elections that we lost with people following that line.
Yes, I think, well, there's no question that he was not as liberal as you would have liked him to be and I would have liked him to be. Take the question of welfare. And the welfare reform, which everybody says it was wonderful. We did a welfare reform in New York that said work is better than welfare.
Right.
And that if you can work, you should work. And we passed it. And the Ford Foundation gave us a prize for it as a very innovative program. This is before you did it nationally. We had one difference, however. We said in New York, as you'll recall, yeah, you have to work if you can, but if you can get an education and we'll help you, we'll cooperate with you. We'll give you daycare for your child. We'll give you breaks on getting into city universities because we want to see you educated. I could get you to work by just handing you a broom, or a mop, but that's not going to get any upward mobility. And you're going to have to supplement your income, and who knows how you'll do that. So that was Clinton, and we were against him on that. So a lot of us were. Marion Wright Edelman. However, let's look at Clinton this way so that we can judge the current government in terms of Clinton. By the time he was finished in 2000, he delivered to the new government, the Bush government, the following: 22 million new jobs, $5.4 trillion
in the Treasury.
In the Treasury, right? An upwardly mobile middle class. They were moving up. The poor were shrinking when he came to us. You know, he delivered all of that.
Were the rich getting richer?
Yes.
They were still getting richer.
And that was
as much
good.
as they are now?
That was good. Well, no, not as much as now, but there were more billionaires and there were more millionaires, which is to say, look, if you do it our way reasonably, it doesn't mean you can't get rich. If you had more skilled workers here than 1 out of 4, which is all you have now, and skilled workers are 4 years after high school. If you had more skilled workers, you'd make more money in your business. I mean, because you'd have it available to you. If you had fewer poor people and more people able to earn their own living, let's face it, you'd have fewer social problems that you're paying for now. Fewer drug addicts, fewer people in jails, et cetera, et cetera. So if you take what Clinton left Bush and then ask the American people, what happened to that legacy? You now have the largest deficit instead of the largest surplus ever. Your job numbers are going up, and they're boasting, but it's the slowest recovery from a recession in modern history. The poor people, instead of shrinking, are growing 4 years in a row, after welfare reform, incidentally. That gets you back to Clinton. And the
cost of living?
Cost of living, and most of all, our efficacy around the globe. We are not respected the way we were when Clinton finished.
That's true. That is true.
And that's something we have to deal with as well.
Right. So what are we going to do about the country right now?
Get somebody to come to this country and say, look, first thing we have to do is define what we are. And here's what we are. We are a free people, relatively free. Thank God the Constitution gives us that. And we have to fight for that freedom. Be careful about giving away the First Amendment with all this talk about religion. Religion's a good thing. Let's encourage religion. They wanted us to. But let's not go in the religion business. And you, President Bush, when you start making policies on the grounds that, well, God told me life begins at conception, not fertilization, conception, and you know that, but you can't prove it scientifically, that's not so hot. And then when you give us a Supreme Court justice, whom we don't understand because she has no experience, and we ask you why, you say because she's an evangelical.
She prays with me.
That's a little dangerous about the First Amendment, so we want to be careful there. But we also want to do this. We don't have enough well-educated people, and it's not their fault. They can't afford to buy the education. We have to correct that. We don't have enough people who have the security of health care insurance. 45 million people don't have it. We must do something about that. The Social Security problem we can handle. It needs handling, but there's many ways to handle it.
But it's not as grave as he said it was.
It is not nearly as good. It is not nearly as
notice, incidentally, it's been off we haven't heard about it for a while.
And when you get to foreign policy, Mr. President, there's only one thing you've learned, apparently. You've learned you can't go alone, because now we see, you're not talking about going alone against Iran. You're not talking about going alone against North Korea. You don't want any part of those people, and you're right. Last time we faced the Koreans, we had an awful lot of trouble in a war. And so you're now learning to use your allies. If you had done that in the first place, as I said before, we might have avoided the war. Now, you have to get out of Iraq, and you have to start by next September. Between now and next September, you have 1 more year to do training. And when I say you've got to get your people out of Iraq, because our boys and women and innocent Iraqis are dying because we're there. You have Brent Scowcroft, who worked for President Bush, your father, Mr. President, says to you directly, first of all, don't go into the war in Iraq. You didn't listen. Now he says your war is attracting terrorists, not chasing them away. So you have to get out of Iraq. I'm not going to argue, should you have gone in? It's too late for that. You shouldn't have. Somebody lied to us. That's done. This you can take care of. And the Democrats should be saying that right now. We are all pledged to get out of Iraq starting in September. That doesn't mean you'll all suddenly, 140,000 people leave, but you'll start it in a meaningful way. And to do that, you've got to go to all the neighbors around Iraq that'll still talk to you, who also hate al-Qaeda. The Arabs don't all love al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a threat to them too. Get those Arabs and say, you have to pick up where we're leaving off. Get some of those European nations to say, we did our thing, now you people have to help out. And talk to them about that, and talk intelligently. One final point on that. We have to not forget about the hemisphere we're living in. We've been awful when it comes to South America. Some of them hate us down there. Now we're doing it to Canada. Now we're losing Canada. My God, right. How did you manage that? How do
we just ignore treaties? How do we ignore world opinion? See, I would say that somebody has to say, Mr. President, you have dishonored the trust of the office, and you have really, you should incur the wrath of the people. I mean, they have indulged in deception,
Deception's clear.
Corruption.
Corruption's even more clear.
I mean, what have they done that's been responsible?
No,
nothing.
They have an appalling record. I mean, just an appalling record. And a good way to highlight that is to go back to Clinton and say, here's where you started. Right. You started with this huge surplus, it's gone. You started with an middle class that was moving up, it's going down. It's so
is there anybody that says that? And if they do say it, then we think, oh, they're really way out there, right? Who's called for his impeachment?
Very small number of people.
Dennis Kucinich.
Maxine Waters, I think, joined, and some people.
And so, in a way, again, it's polarizing, because then it looks like they're being the fringe people are there doing it, right?
Now, I hate to remind you of this, but I'm going to.
All right.
Because it was at your house.
Okay.
We had the guy who was right on these issues, Bob Graham.
Right.
And he came to your house, and he spoke to a bunch of us. And he was dead right. I mean, about everything. He was right on Iraq. We could have proven it through testimony and Frank's. I mean, he has them in the book, dead to rights. We shouldn't go to Iraq until we finish in Afghanistan. And he voted that way. And he was very intelligent. He was a senator. Why didn't he win? Because of this stupidity of the American people that allows us to be dazzled by Marilyn Monroe. Lovely lady, I'm sure, but but
the terrible part,
charisma in a president. What is charisma in a president? You know, well, he's pretty and he's soft. This guy was smart. He was sincere. He was right. He was educated.
He gave you such a sense of security and knowledge and wisdom, right? He did. He was just very solemn. But the other part of it was that there was nobody in that race that really had charisma. Who did? Nobody.
In the end, that's the way it came out.
And so it was.
In the end, that's the way it came out. But I think that the charisma should be in the issues. The charisma should be in what you say.
It's what you say and how you say it, isn't it?
It should be very.
Robert Kennedy always fascinated me, because he was a shy kind of, reclusive guy, thoughtful, but shy. So what was his charisma? But
his ideas.
It was his sincerity also. Yeah. I thought one of the best speeches most moving speeches, I mean, you've given some of the best, but moving, was the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and he gave that just wonderful talk. Where was he, in East St. Louis or in
I forget,
wherever, but out west. Anyway, so we lack that kind of thing. We lack the conviction then. We really, it comes down to we lack the conviction.
That's what
because
I said
we're
in the
ruling by the polls, right?
I started with we lack a philosophy.
Yeah.
Not an ideology, a philosophy. You've got to stand for something. Look, you're trying a case before a jury. And I wish the elective process were more like the jury process, because the juries, every once in a while, they'll go wacky for some reason.
But it is a remarkable process.
Overall, you put these 12 people or whatever in a box, and they may be a Con Edison worker or a retired school teacher. You give them exquisitely difficult problems, but you explain it to them. You give them all the evidence. You keep them free of things that will confuse them. You give them instruction on the law by the judge. You give both people an opportunity to give both sides of the case. They will be right much, much more than they would be wrong. And if the same thing happened in politics, if instead of 28-second commercials, you ban 28-second commercials, you ban all that stupid sloganeering that can win a case with a slogan or or beat you with some negative on the other guy. And you just reduce it to intelligent descriptions of your issues, intelligent descriptions of my disagreements with you, and give the American people, if instead of 2 conventions, you had one grand convention in October, the unconventional convention, all debates. Just imagine if in the last race, it was all debates, but not little debates, not a debate where you're given a minute and a half.
Right.
I'm going to give you whatever time you need, and you can bring in your aide. And Cuomo will have his aide. And we're going to ask you, how are you going to balance the budget? And we're going to give you 5-10 minutes to answer. And you can ask your aide, because we don't want to test your glibness.
Then you have a national primary.
And you'd just do the convention.
I mean, the system we have is certainly not conducive, I don't think. I mean, it's you have to be crazy to run to begin with, no?
Well, you have to
driven.
Be driven. Maybe
and
that's a kind of word.
It seems that the candidates aren't driven by their philosophy, they're driven by their what are they driven by?
Well, I think if you listen to candidates, what they would say to you is, look, I'm going to do the right thing by my ideology, but first I have to get there.
Elected.
And so I can't give them the full import of my ideology because it'll sound too extreme. But once I get there, then I can sneak up on them and get it done.
So do they understand the American public?
They understand it well enough to know how to fool it into electing them. Yeah, they understand the American public. Look, you can ask the question 5 times. I think I will always answer it the same way. What we don't have is what you've called conviction and I've called philosophy. What we don't have is people who have very strong ideas about what's wrong with this country, how to make it right, and who believe that what we should be in the end is like a family. And this does not mean, if you have a large family, this does not mean you give any kid a handout, because a handout will spoil them. Right. You just can't make life too easy for them. But you will if the kid tries as hard as he can and has some potential that he hasn't been able to reach, but not because he's not working at it, but because he needs a little bit of help with a special kind of teacher or a school. You'll go out of your way to cooperate with his good intent. That's what we should be as a community.
We're going to come back with a second part, but we have to stop now. Thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.